words of kings teach humility. See, I'm studying deep, no rushing through. Finding messages that ring so true. Breaking down the verses, chapter and verse. Learning from the best, putting wisdom first. Meditation got me floating free, while the incense rises peacefully. Temple walls contain this sacred scene. As I and I grow more serene.
Hello, and welcome to another Temple 420 Bible study. This is, it's been a little bit, but back on here and decided that I'd go through Esther here as we just celebrated Purim here. I think the story is an amazing story that we should share and let people know about here. Let me get it added to the stage. There we go. Okay. First, dear Almighty Living God, thank you for the blessings you give us. Thank you for the people who are watching this, and may it inspire them to be like Esther and be strong and help lead people and do the right things in the path. And may it inspire them to seek more things after you and have a relationship with you if they don't, and strengthen their relationships if they already do. Amen. So, let's go here. Esther 1:1. These are the events that took place in the time of Ashtaroth. Ashtaroth ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. It was in those days when King Ashtaroth sat on his royal throne in Shushan, the capital. In the third year of his reign, that he gave a banquet for all of his officials and his courtiers and the army of Persia and Medina, and the nobles of the provincial officials were in attendance. He displayed dazzling wealth of his kingdom and a great splendor for a long time, 180 days. At the end of that time, the king gave a 7-day banquet in the courtyard of the royal place, a royal palace garden for all the people, both great and small, there in Shushan in the capital. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings fastened to silver rods, with cords of fine linen and purple, and the columns were marble. Couches for reclining at the table were gold and silver on a mosaic of flooring of malachite, marble, mother of pearl, and onyx. Drinks were served in gold goblets, each goblet different from the others. There was royal wine in abundance, as befits royal bounty. The drinking was not according to any fixed rule. The king had ordered the stewards to serve each man what he wanted. And Vashti, the queen, gave a banquet for the women of the royal house that belonged to Ashtaroth. Queen Vashti's refusal. On the 7th day, the king was in high spirits from the wine, and he ordered Mimlim, Pizza, Parvona, Pigta, Avagata, Zihar, Caracas, and the seven officers who attended him, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with a royal crown, in order to show the people and the officials her beauty, for she was indeed a good-looking woman. Let's see. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the order of the king, which he had sent through his officers. This enraged the king, and his anger blazed inside of him. It was the king's custom. He consulted with the sages, well versed in the manners of law and justice. With him were Karnosha, Sitar, Adamata, Tarnish, Meres, Marsla, and Murkan, the 7 vice regents of Persia and Medina, who were there as part of the inner circle and the most important officials in the kingdom. The king asked the sages, according to the law, what should we do with Queen Vashti, since he did not obey the order of King Ashtaroth as conveyed by the officers? Melucan presented the king and vice regents to answer. Vashti, the queen, has wronged not only the king, but also the officials and the people of the province of Ashtaroth. Because of this act, the Queen's Act will become known to all the women, who will then start showing disrespect to their husbands. They will say King Ashtaroth ordered Vashti, the queen, to be brought before him, but she wouldn't come. Moreover, the nobles of the ladies of the Prince of Persia and Medina, who were to hear the queen's conduct, would mention it to all the king's officials, which would bring out no end to the disrespect and discord. If it pleases his majesty, let him make a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, which are irrevocable, that Vashti is to never again be admitted into the presence of King Ashtaroth, and that the king will give her royal position to someone better than she. And when he made the edict by the king is proclaimed through the length and breadth of the kingdom, that all the wives will honor their husbands, great or small. This advice pleased the king and the officials, so he did what Marcomacan Mimu Khan had suggested. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, and each province its own script, and each people its own language, that every man should be a master of his house and speak the language of his own people. Esther, chosen queen. A while later, King Ashtaroth's anger had subsided. He remembered Vashti, what she had done and what had been decreed against her. The king's servants attending him said a search should be made for young, good-looking virgins. The king should appoint officials in all the provinces of the kingdom to gather all the young, good-looking virgins to the house for the harem. In Shushan, the capital, they should be put under the care of Haggai, the king's official in charge of the woman. He will be given them cosmetics that they require. Then the girl who seems best to the king should come instead of Vashti. This proposal pleased the king, so he acted accordingly. There was in Shushan, the capital, a man who was a Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yar, and the son of Shimei, and the son of Cush, and the son of Benini. He had been exiled from Jerusalem, for the captives exiled with Yanaka, king of Judea is what that should be. This spelled with a Y, since they didn't have J's back then. From whom, that's so sensitive here, from whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel, had carried off. He had raised Hadath, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, because she had neither father nor mother. The girl was shapely, good-looking woman. After her father and her mother's death, Mordecai had accepted her as his own daughter. And then you're going to show up, kitty cat, aren't you? Mordecai had accepted him as his own daughter. I can't see, though. He's like, I don't care. I just need you to see me and pet me. When the king's order and decree were proclaimed, many of the girls assembled at Shushan, the capital, under the care of Haggai. Esther was then taken to the king's house and put under the care of Haggai, who was in charge of the women. The girl pleased him and won his favor, so he lost no time giving her cosmetics, her portions of special food, and the 7 girls from the king's palace had to attend with her. He also promoted her and the girls attending to the best place in the harem's quarters. Esther did not disclose her people or her family ties because Mordecai had instructed her not to tell anyone. Every day, Mordecai would walk around in front of the courtyard of the harem's house in order to know how Esther was doing and what happened to her. Each girl had given her turn to appear before King Ashtaroth. Ashtaroth. I can never say that. So I'm butchering his name like crazy. After she had undergone the full 12-month preparation, period prescribed for the women, consisting of a 6-month treatment with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfume and other cosmetics for women. Then he went. Then, when the girl went to see the king, whatever she wanted would be given to her, as she went from the harem's house to the king's palace. She would go in the evening, and on the following day she would return to another part of the harem's house and be under the care of Shah Ashgaz, the king's officer in charge of the concubines. She would not go to the king unless he was especially pleased with her and had summoned her by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abishai, whom Mordecai had adopted as his own daughter, to appear to the king, she didn't ask for anything other than what Haggai, the king's officer in charge of the harem, advised. Yet Esther was admired by all that saw her. She was brought to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, Tevet, during the 7th year of his reign. The king liked Esther far more than any of his wives. None of the other virgins had obtained such favor and approval for him. So he put the royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. The king had given a great banquet in Esther's honor for all of his officers and servants, decreed a holiday for the provinces, and distributed gifts of royal bounty. Mordecai discovers a plot. When the girls would gather on occasions, Mordecai would sit at the king's gate. Esther had not revealed her family ties to her people, as Mordecai had ordered her. For Esther continued obeying what Mordecai had told her to do, as she had when he was raising her. On one of those occasions, when Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, 2 of the king's officers, Bigtan and Tarash, form a group in charge of the private entryways, became angry and conspired to assassinate the king Ahasuerus. But Mordecai learned about it and told Esther the queen. Esther reported it to the king, crediting Mordecai. The matter was investigated and found to be true, and both were hanged at a stake, and all was recorded in the daily journal that was kept with the king. Esther 3:1. Haman plots against the Jews. Sometime later, Ahasuerus began to single out Haman, the son of Hammedatha, and Agi, as for advancement. Eventually, he gave him presents of all of his fellow officers. All the king's servants at the king's gate would kneel and bow down before Haman, because the king had ordered. But Mordecai would neither kneel or bow down to him. The king's servants at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why don't you obey the king's order?" But after they'd confronted him a number of times without him paying attention to them, they told Haman, in order to figure out whether Mordecai's explanation was that he was Jew would suffice for his behavior. Haman was furious when he saw that Mordecai was not kneeling and bowing to him. However, on learning what people Mordecai belonged to, it all seemed to him a waste to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Rather, he decided to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole Ahasuerus kingdom. Because, of course, the Jews are instructed not to bow before anyone but God himself. In the first month, the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of Ahasuerus, they began throwing pure. That is, they cast lots before Haman every day and every month until the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to Ahasuerus, "There is a particular people scattered and dispersed among the peoples and the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of other people. Moreover, they do not observe the king's laws. It does not benefit the king to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, have a decree written for their destruction, and I will hand over 330 tons of silver to the officials in charge of the king's affairs and deposited it in the royal treasury. The king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Harman, the son of Hamedata, the Agagi, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to Harman, "The money is given to you and the people too to do what seems good to you." The king's secretaries were summoned on the 13th day in the first month. They wrote down all Harman's orders to the king's commanders and governors and all the provinces and the officials of every people, to the province in its script and to the people in their own language. Everything was written in the name of the king, as for oath, and sealed with the king's signet ring. The letters were sent by courier to all the royal provinces to destroy, kill, and exterminate all Jews from young to old, including small children and women, in specific day, the 13th day of the 12th month of Adar, to seize their goods as plunder. A copy of the document was issued as a decree, and every province was to be proclaimed to all the peoples, so they would be ready for that day. At the king's order, runners went out quickly, and the decree was issued at the Shushan capital. Then the king and Harman sat for a drink together, but the city of Shushan was thrown into confusion. Esther agrees to help the Jews. Esther 4:1. When Mordecai learned of everything that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, lamenting and crying bitterly. He stopped before the king's gate, since no one was allowed to go inside the king's gate wearing sackcloth. And every province reached the king's order and decree. There was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, as many lay on sackcloth and ashes. When the girls and the official attending Esther came and informed her of this, the queen became deeply distressed. She sent for clothes for Mordecai to wear instead of a sackcloth, but he wouldn't accept them. So Esther summoned Hakath, one of the officials attending her. Let's see here. Scroll it down. Some kind of link here. Let's go back. There we go. So Esther summoned Hakath, one of the king's officials, attending her, and instructed him to go to Mordecai and figure out what this is all about and why. Hakath went out to Mordecai in the open space in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him everything that had happened exactly to him, and how much silver Haman had promised to put in the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the decree for their destruction issued in Shushan, so that he could show Esther and explain it to her. And then he instructed her to approach the king, intercede with him, and implore his favor on behalf of her people. Hakath returned and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hakath and gave him a message for Mordecai. All the king's officials, as well as the people in the royal provinces, know that if any man or woman approaches the king in their inner courtyard without being summoned, there's just one law. He must be put to death, unless the king holds out gold scepter for him to remain alive. And I hadn't been summoned for the king for the past 30 days. Upon what Esther told Mordecai, asked them to give Esther this answer. Don't suppose that merely because you happen to be in the royal place, you will escape any more than the Jews. For if you fail to speak up now, relief and deliverance will come before the Jews in a different direction. But if you and your father's family will perish, who knows whether you didn't come into this royal position precisely for such time as this. Esther had them return this answer to Mordecai. Go and assemble the Jews to be found in Shushan. and have them fast for me, neither eating nor drinking for 3 days, night and day. Also, I and the girls will be tending the fast the same way. I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Then Mordecai went his way and did everything Esther had ordered him to do. So she's taking on her bravery and going to take on and see if she can skip being killed here, because you can't come to the king unless you're invited. Esther prepares a banquet. Esther 5:1. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner courtyard of the king's palace, opposite of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the king's hall, across from the entrance to the hall. When the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the courtyard, she won his favor. So the king extended his gold scepter in his hand towards Esther. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. What is it you want, Queen Esther? The king asked her, whatever's your request, up to half the kingdom will be given to you. If it's all right with the king, answered Esther, let the king and Haman come to the banquet I have prepared for him. The king said, bring Haman quickly, so that Esther asked for can be done. So the king and Haman came to the banquet Esther has prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, whatever will be done, whatever your request will be granted, whatever you want, up to half the kingdom, it'll be done. Then Esther answered, my request, what I want is this. If I have won the king's favor, if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I want, let the king and Haman come to a banquet, which I'll prepare for them. And tomorrow I will do as the king said. Haman plans to hang Mordecai. That day, Haman went out happy and in good spirits. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, he neither rose or moved for him. Haman was infuriated with Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, where he summoned and brought his friend Zeresh and his wife. Haman boasted about them and his vast wealth and his many sons, everything connected about how the king promoted him and given him presents over other officials and servants of the king. Indeed, Haman added, Esther the queen let no one into the banquet with the king that she had prepared for him except for himself, and tomorrow I'm invited by her together with the king. Yet none of this does me any good at all. As long as I keep seeing Mordecai, the Jew remains seated at the gate. At this, Zeresh, his wife, and his friends said to him, have gallows 7 feet high constructed, and in the morning I will speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on it. Then go in and enjoy yourself with the king at the banquet. Haman liked the idea, so he had the gallows made. The king honors Mordecai. That night, the king couldn't sleep, so he ordered a record of the daily journal brought, and they were read to the king. It was found written that Mordecai had told about Bigtana and Teresh, 2 of the king's officers from the group, and in charge of private intrigues, who had conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor or distinction from conferred on Mordecai for this? The king's servants answered, nothing was done for him. And the king asked, who is that in the courtyard? For Haman had come into the outer courtyard of the king's palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he prepared for him. The king's servants told him, it is Haman standing there in the courtyard. The king said, have him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what should be done for a man that the king wants to honor? Haman talked to himself, who would the king want to honor more than me? So Haman answered the king, for a man the king wants to honor, have royal robes brought which the king himself wears, and the horse which the king rides, and with a royal crown on his head. The robes and the horse shall be handed over to one of the king's most respected officials, and they should put the robes on the man the king wants to honor, and lead him horseback through the city streets, proclaiming him, this is what he has done for the man, and this is who the king wants to honor. The king said to Haman, hurry and take the robes and the horse as you said, and do this for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Don't leave out anything you mentioned. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and dressed Mordecai, and led him riding through the streets, as he proclaimed ahead of him, this is what has been done for a man whom the king wants to honor. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed him home, with his head covered in mourning. After Haman told Zeresh, his wife, and his friends everything that had happened to him, his advisors and his wife said to him, if Mordecai before you, whom you have begun to follow as a Jew, you will not get the better of him. On the contrary, your downfall before him is certain. Esther reviews Haman's plot. While they were still talking with him, the king's officials came, hurrying to bring Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman went to Esther's banquet. And the king said to Esther at the wine banquet, whatever you request, Queen Esther, you'll be granted. Whatever you want up to half the kingdom, it'll be done. Esther the queen answered, if I have won your favor as king, and if it pleases the king, I ask to be what is given to him is my life and the lives of my people. For we have been sold, and my people to be destroyed, killed, and exterminated. If we had only been sold as men and women slaves, I would have remained quiet. Since then, our trouble would have not been worth the damage that it would cause the king to alter the situation. Then King Ahasuerus asked Esther the queen, who is he? Where is the man who dared to do such a thing? Esther said, a ruthless enemy. It's the wicked Haman. Haman stood aghast before the king and queen. And Haman is hanged. Enraged, the king got up from the wine banquet and went outside his palace garden. But Haman remained, pleading with Esther the queen to save his life, for he could see that the king had decided to do with him. Haman just fallen on the couch where Esther was. When the king returned from the palace to the wine banquet, he shouted, is he even going to rape the queen here in the palace before my eyes? The moment the words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Halabova, one of the king's attendants, said, look, the gallows 75 feet high that Haman made for Mordecai, who speaks only good of the king, is standing at Haman's house. The king said, hang him on it. So they hung Haman on the gallows that they prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's anger subsided. Esther saves the Jews. That same day, Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Esther the queen. Also, Mordecai appeared before the king, for Esther had revealed his relationship to her. The king removed his signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. Then Esther put Mordecai in charge of Haman's house, and Esther spoke to the king. She fell at his feet and begged him with tears to put an end to the mischief Haman the Agag had caused by the scheme he had worked against the Jews. The king extended the gold scepter towards Esther, so Esther got up and stood in front of the king. She said, if it pleases the king, I have won his favor. If the matter seems right to the king, I have his approval, then let an order be written, rescinding the letters devised by Haman and the Hamada the Agai, who wrote to destroy all the Jews in the royal provinces. For how can I bear to see the disaster that had overcome my people? How can I endure seeing the extermination of my kinsmen? King Ahasuerus said to Esther the queen and Mordecai the Jew, listen, I gave Esther the house of Haman and hanged him on the gallows because he threatened the lives of the Jews. You shall issue a decree in the king's name for whatever you want concerning the Jews, and seal it with the king's signet ring, because a decree written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring cannot be rescinded by anyone. The king's secretaries were summoned at the time. On the 23rd day of the month of Silaban, the decree was written according to everything Mordecai had written, but ordered according to the Jews, and to the army of commanders, governors, and officials from the provinces of India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province its script, and to each province its language, also to the Jews in their script and their language. They wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it in the king's signet ring. They sent the letters by couriers on horseback, riding fast horses, used by the king's service and bred from royal stock. The letters said that the king had granted the Jews in every city to the right to assemble and defend their lives by destroying, killing, and exterminating any forces in the people's province that would attack them, their little ones or women, or try to seize their goods as plunder. On the designated day of the provinces, King Ahasuerus, namely the 13th day of the 12th month of Adar, the copy of the edict was to be issued as a decree to every province and claimed by the peoples, and the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance over the enemies. Couriers riding fast horses used in the king's service left quickly, pressed by the king's order, and the decree was issued in Shushan, the capital. Meanwhile, Mordecai left the king's presence and arrayed in royal blue and white, wearing a gold crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan shouted for joy. For all the Jews, it was light, gladness, and honor. In every province, the city where the king's order and decree arrived, the Jews had gladness and joy, a feast and a holiday. Many from the people's lands became Jews because of the fear of the Jews had overcome them. The Jews destroy their enemies. Esther 9:1. The time approached for the king's order and decree to be carried out. In the days the enemies had hoped to overpower them. But as it turned out, the opposite took place. The Jews overpowered those who hated him. This on the 13th day of the 12th month of Adar. The Jews assembled in their cities all through the provinces of King Ahasuerus, and to attack anyone who tried to do them harm. And no one was able to withstand them because all the people were afraid of them. All the officials of the province and the army commanders and the governors of those occupied with the king's affairs helped the Jews because they were afraid of Mordecai. For Mordecai had become a powerful person in the king's palace, and his fame spread through all the provinces. Mordecai continued to grow increasingly powerful. The Jews put all their enemies to sword, and there was a great slaughter and destruction, as they did whatever they wanted to who hated them. In Shushan, the capital, Jews slaughtered 500 men. They put to death the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hamada, and the enemy of the Jews, Parshadada, Dalphon, Alspua, Portra, Adalea, Ardata, Parmasata, Arisali, Aridai, and Vazata. They did not touch the spoil. The same day, the king had been told the number of those killed in the Shushan capital. He said to Esther the queen, if the Jews had slaughtered 500 men in Shushan the capital, and now the 10 sons of Haman, they'd done the rest in the royal provinces. Now whatever you request will be granted. Whatever more you want will be done. Esther replied, if it pleases the king, let the Jews in Shushan act tomorrow in accordance with today's decree, and also have Haman's 10 sons hanged on the gallows. The king ordered these things to be done in the decree in Shushan, and they hung Haman's 10 sons. So the Jews in Shushan assembled on the 4th day in the 4th month of Adar and killed 300 men in Shushan, but they did not touch the spoil. The other Jews whose royal provinces had asserted them defended their lives and won from their enemies, slaying 75,000 of them that hated them, but without touching the spoil. On the 13th day of Adar, so the 14th day of Adar, rested and made a holiday for celebrating and rejoicing. However, the Jews of Shushan assembled on both the 13th and 14th days of Adar. So it was on the 15th day they rested and made a holiday for celebrating and rejoicing. This is why the Jews of the villages, those who live in unwalled towns, make a 14th day of the month of Adar for celebrating and rejoicing, a holiday, in time to send their portions of food. The Feast of Purim was inaugurated. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews in the provinces of Ashtaroth, both near and far, instructing them to observe the 14th day of the month of Adar, the 15th day to every year, to commemorate the days in which the Jews obtained rest from their enemies, and the month which those turned to sorrow to gladness, from mourning into a holiday. They were to make them days of celebrating and rejoicing, sending portions of food to each other and giving gifts to the poor. So the Jews took upon themselves to continue what they had already begun to do, as Mordecai had written to them, because Haman, the son of Hamdani, the Agagi, the enemy of the Jews, had been plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and been thrown poor, that is, cast lots to crush and destroy them. But when Esther came to the king, he ordered the letters that Haman's wicked scheme, and he had plotted against the Jews, should recoil his own head, and that his sons should be hung on the gallows. This is why the days have been called Purim, after Pur. This is because everything written in this letter they had seen concerning the matter and what had come upon them. The Jews resolved and took to themselves the descendants of all who might join them without fail and observe these 2 days in accordance to what was written in this letter and appointed at the time of year. And it was these days that be remembered and observed through every generation, every family, and every province of the city, that these days of Purim would never cease among the Jews, and their memory be lost by their descendants. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abichai, and Mordecai the Jew, gave full written authority to confirm a letter about Purim. He sent copies to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ashtaroth, ensuring peace and security, and requiring observance of these days of Purim as their destined times, as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoyed them, as they had established for themselves and their descendants concerning the matters of fasting and lamenting. At Esther's orders, these matters of Purim were put into writing in the book. The greatness of Mordecai. King Ahasuerus laid tribute on the land and the coast and the islands. All the acts of his power and might, and full account of the high honor to which the king advanced Mordecai, are written in the annals of the king of Medina and Persia. For Mordecai, the Jew, was second only to Ahasuerus, and he was a great man among the Jews, popular with all of his many countrymen. He sought out the good of his people and interceded for the welfare of all their descendants. And there was Esther here for you. Thanks for attending and hanging out here, listening to Esther. I hope you learned something about it. Got to hear something a little bit new, a little different with it. I think I often hit that one, though. So maybe it wasn't different if you followed along and did these things. But thank you, Almighty God, for the blessings you give these people and these people who attended and watch. Thank you for all that you do for them, and bless them through the day. Hope they become strong in your word and seek you out. Amen. I'll put below the contacts for Temple 420 if you would like to join these live. you'd like to check out our information, as well as my group, Assembly of the Renowned Plantation. We also have various things there. I need to figure out what options are there, though. But you can definitely check out our sites and see the ones listed below. We've had Upon This Church, Upon This Rock.Church, for if people are hungry, they can sign up there. If they're hungry for the word, they can also sign up for the program and get a word sent out to them monthly. And there's always good resources on there. You can join our Facebook group and many other things. Thank you. God bless.